I'm going to talk really fast. Somebody has some background noise. I'm not sure who it is.
Steve, there are 3 boxes of you. You don't know why.
Maybe it's someone else from my office, but
well, one has a picture of Verena in it.
beautiful family.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, Verena. I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't tell.
Hello, gorgeous.
Verena.
Hi, guys. Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, I think it's possible that the link that we received just automatically names us as Steve.
Right, because I'm the third Steve, Jean McCaffer.
I love it. So many Steves, so little time.
Yeah.
All right, we're just waiting.
Nicole, we're on. We're live.
Oh, we are. Okay. Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nicole Alifanti. I'm the president of CURE, the Coalition for Understanding Racism Through Education. We started a little late. Thanks for hanging in. For those of you who might have friends who are trying to get on, we are also live streaming on the LMC Media Facebook page, so you can send them there as well. I'm here with Ann Lobu and Gabby Blumberg. They're also CURE leaders, and we are so excited to be partnered with LMC Media. We are also partners with the Larchmont Mamaroneck Lions Club, who are our fiscal sponsors. We're really honored tonight to have this panel of elected officials with us, who are going to sort of be going over the last 4 panels that we had prior to this on digital learning, housing, employment, immigration. And we have Shelley Mayer, Steve Otis, Catherine Parker, Tom Murphy, and Nancy Seligson. And Nancy does have to run at 7 for an important meeting, so she'll be hopping off. This series was Ann's brainchild, and she thought it was important to look at the inequities in our community, especially in the light of COVID, especially in our vulnerable communities. And we are, as you know, looking at things through a racism lens. So that's where we come from when we analyze things through CURE. We're here to just scratch the surface like we did on all of our panels prior. We hit some big topics. We had some incredible experts. We learned a good deal. And now we're not solving the problems of the world with these beautiful panelists, but we definitely want to get their ideas about what's transpired in our conversations. At the end of the panel, we're going to try to take questions and maybe have a little sign off from each panelist. Hi, welcome. And we just hope that we can get a lot of good stuff in an hour and a half. So we wanted to start. Did I miss anything? I just want to make sure that I don't think I did. Okay, we wanted to start with a general question. Yes, Ann?
Did you tell people how to send in questions?
I'm sorry. If you go into the chat, you want to make sure that in the drop down you hit attendees. You don't want to just be answering questions to the panelists. You want to make sure that everyone can see the question. So we will start with just a general question. And this is something that we've been curious about, and you can speak to it, each of you. You can take turns around what it's looking like in your districts. So Governor Cuomo has asked any municipalities with police departments to have a police reform sort of task force. And everyone's putting that together now. And I think they're supposed to come out with some kind of a plan. I think it's in April of 2021, correct? So maybe you can give us an idea of what that looks like in the districts that you're overseeing, and also how the community will be engaging with these task force. So if there's a specific order, you can just raise your hand, or I could go by who I see first. Maybe if you want to start with Nancy, because you'll be leading at some point.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. It's really nice to be here amongst all of you for the CURE panel. And it is true that Governor Cuomo passed an executive order number 203 that asks for each municipality or entity that has a police department to create a police reform and reimagination report by April 2021. In the town of Mamaroneck, before that executive order came out, our councilman Jeff King created a racial equity task force. And that was several months ago. And there are 7 members on that committee. This, of course, was in response to what was going on around the country and thinking about how it affects our whole community and things we should be looking at in our community. So they've met several times, and it is really envisioned as a long-term task force. It's not focused just on this report, but they will be having a role in this report as well. They recently met with the police chief and our town administrator, and they will be given a report really on information on specific issues having to do with the police and police activities. That report will go up on our website, and we will hold some public meetings to have people talk about that information and talk with the racial equity task force. We think that the first meeting should be around the second week of December. And then we envision having 2 or 3 meetings with the public. So the report, it's a pretty short time frame to get that report to the governor. And we don't think that we're going to solve or address every single issue in that report. It's really a start. But the Racial Equality Task Force will be looking at those issues and moving forward on those issues for a period of time. It'll go way beyond April. And we're looking forward to it as an opportunity to improve communications and understanding of what the police do and how things work in the town of Mamaroneck.
Okay, thank you so much. I have Shelley next in my window.
Okay. So one, thank you for having me, Nicole and Gabby and all of the CURE. I want to commend you. I think it's this is a really exciting development for Mamaroneck that you have convened and that you've put together not only this panel, but the other 4 that preceded it. And as you say, you know, sometimes we need to force the conversation. This conversation occurred, and I'm so glad to be part of it. So thank you. The one thing about the context of the governor's executive order, after the murder of George Floyd, the legislature went back into session in the middle of COVID and passed about 10 very significant bills that were an effort to address the relationships between police departments and particularly communities of color. And Steve in the Assembly and myself in the Senate, we passed these bills, and it was a very, very contentious in our relationship with the police unions and the police chiefs. Among the things we did, as you know, is we criminalized chokeholds. We made that a crime. We modified 50A, which protected disciplinary records from ever being exposed in the public about a police officer's prior complaints. And that was, of course, one of the most challenging and difficult conversations all of us had. After we did these bills, which passed both houses, the majority of them, there were some that didn't, but overall they gave a lot of power to the Attorney General, for example, in the case of a death of a civilian between a police officer and a civilian. These were very significant changes and very difficult to do. And they took tremendous leadership of our respective bodies, Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Carl Hastie, to negotiate these bills that the governor was going to sign them. So I don't want to leave that off the table, because that was part of the fight of the moment to say we have to do something. So after we did those 10 bills, but before the governor signed them, he issued this executive order, which I think is a very important step, because it forces a conversation that I found in talking to police chiefs, police union officials throughout my district and in the state. There was, in some chiefs, and I'm not saying it was across the board, a sense you are talking about a New York City problem. You are not talking about a Westchester problem. You are not using examples from Westchester. We don't really have these racial issues as you're describing them. that you are imposing a New York City problem and with a New York City solution, you're imposing it on us, which from my experience representing many different districts and certainly being a person from Yonkers is not the case. That in all of our communities, these issues of race do exist. They're not always at a crisis level. They're frequently don't rise to the level of death or injury, but they create tensions that are very antithetical to good policing and to safety in our communities. And some police, and not across the boards, and many police chiefs were more forward thinking than others, but as a group, and I met with them as a group, were reluctant to acknowledge that we have to do something. So that's why I thought this executive order, by forcing people to the table and listening to each other, was so important. And to your point, one is this came with a very big stick. If you didn't do this, you weren't going to get any money from the state. It was not voluntary. And secondly, this said who had to be consulted. It isn't that they should be consulted. You must consult with stakeholders, including the police force, members of the community with emphasis in areas with high numbers of police and community interactions. That's parts of your community of color, obviously. The nonprofit and faith-based community, the DA, the public defender, and local elected officials. And then when you have that plan, as Nancy said, you have to have public hearings and take input. So I think this is a way to move this conversation forward in a constructive way with many fantastic police chiefs and officers who are really doing their best, but we can't be afraid to have the conversation and hear each other. And this is a tool towards it, but it shouldn't be lost in the overall package of really making a concerted effort to change the laws by which police departments were governed to move to a better place. So I think that's enough talking. I apologize for going too long.
No, that's great. There are things in there that I did not know at all. So that was very informative, Shelley. Thank you. Tom.
Good.
I didn't hear what you said, Nicole. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Tom, you're next. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm just going.
Thank you. I really I'm going to echo a lot of what Nancy and Shelley just said. I think that this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for law enforcement. It's an opportunity for elected officials. It's an opportunity for the community to have their concerns and their voices heard. I think, what has been lacking is an honest dialogue. And one of the things I like about the governor's executive order is that it's termed a collaborative. And I think that we all have to start collaborating with each other. It is not the purview of the police department to say, we don't have this problem. It is not their, it is not, the problem isn't just viewed by them, it's how the community views the problem. And I think it's very important also for the community to see the constraints and the difficulties that law enforcement faces. Because as we all know, it's a very dangerous and difficult job. So I think that anything that brings everybody to the table and begins a dialogue, and I echo what Nancy says, this is just the beginning. I think that these are conversations, most of us are of a certain age that we remember the 60s and the 70s, and we look back on that fondly as a time of progress, and laws were passed and attitudes seem to have changed. But then it seemed that sometime in the late 70s, maybe the 80s, we decided, and I'm going to be blunt about this, that a lot of white people decided, hey, this is over. We've done enough. We passed laws. This problem is solved, and it wasn't solved, and we swept it under the rug. And anybody that's swept things under the rug in their personal or private life knows that it comes out. And this is America's swept under the rug for 400 years. And I don't want to leave this legacy of racial antipathy to my children and my grandchildren. We have an opportunity to try and fix this now. And the Black Lives Matter movement has been integral and bringing that to the forefront. And I know a lot of people like to demonize the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's 3 words. It's 3 words. It doesn't mean no one's life matters, but all lives can't matter if Black lives don't matter. It's a contradiction in terms. So, we have to be very cognizant of that, and a lot of us, especially on our, we're all Democrats here, a lot of us on our side of the aisle, I think that a lot of people who are, of a more liberal bent think that they couldn't have racial stereotypes in their head. And, we all grew up in a society that forced it upon us, right? So it's impossible not to be affected by that. And it's impossible not to carry around that legacy and that heritage of that. So I think it's real important that we have these conversations. I'm looking forward to it. And they're going to be painful conversations. It is not going to be fun. In the village of Mamaroneck, Jerry Barbario, our village manager, since he's the chief executive officer, he formed the committee. He put me on it, and I'll be chairing the committee. But, I expect there to be, frank discussions, but I expect them to be, done in the spirit of trying to move us all forward. And I think that we all have to listen to each other. We have to listen to the police that serve this community very well and see what their difficulties and constraints are. But we also have to listen to, experiences other than our own. We all have to think about what it would feel like to walk in those shoes. And it's hard to do. And it's hard for me to do, and I try to do it. So I've actually talked too long too, but I'm looking forward to it. It's like I got a toothache, and I know I got to go to the dentist, and I don't love the dentist, but the tooth's not going to stop hurting until I go to the dentist. But thank you for facilitating this tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom. There are some great points in there, and I think that being ready for the uncomfortable piece and even the painful piece is probably a good way to enter it. Steve, you're next in my. I'm just going around.
Well, we have a great thanks to Cure for what you're doing, and I've watched some of the videos of your programs. I saw one of them live, and really good stuff, and help bring everybody along. In terms of the reimagining of police departments and law enforcement, I want to sort of move on from what Shelley was saying in terms of this. Most importantly, this is supposed to be a community process. And the idea is to hear from people about what the experiences are. And the title is really Reimagine what law enforcement is. And so law enforcement is part of that discussion. But I'm very happy to hear both from Tom and from Nancy that this is an ongoing process. It's not just tied till the April 1st deadline of these reports. And that's an important thing, because I think I'm a big fan of the executive order that the governor had, but I think that it is so much is going to happen after that, because when there's a community reevaluation of what is good, what is bad, what needs to be changed, then there's going to have to be, how does that get implemented? How do you change behaviors if changing behaviors is necessary? How do you educate the community? How do you educate people on the police force if that is necessary? And so we're going to need some additional help, quite frankly, because as for all the hundreds of communities in New York State, there are going to be some common themes, and we're going to need our academic institutions. We're going to need John Jay School of Criminal Justice. We're going to need Division of Criminal Justice Services to provide sort of a curriculum for police department leadership if they're going to be change agents in their local department, to sort of match up what the community is asking for locality by locality. There's going to be a curriculum for that to help police leadership make that happen. I think that's very important. It's not going to happen just with snapping our fingers or issuing a report. It's a process, and so we need to understand that and get people involved in trying to be good listeners, listen to the police, listen to the public, listen to the churches, and hear what people have to say. In terms of the bills that we passed in Albany, the 10 bills that were signed into law, one of them is aimed at accumulating statistics about arrest records, about, from the department level, to see what the racial sort of breakdown is in terms of the administration of our laws, and to take the temperature with some real numbers and real statistics. So that's called the Stat Act. That was one of the bills that was signed into law, and I think that is very important. But we came in, as Shelley said, we came in the middle of COVID and had a special week to pass these bills, a few days to pass these bills in June. They were preceded by very intense discussions within the legislature to negotiate out these bills. And they're all focused on criminal justice. But I think where we're going next in the 2021 legislative session is there are a number of racial equity issues that transcend, that are well beyond criminal justice, because inequality isn't just in the criminal justice world. They're in an issue, and I see Nancy shall nod even more, but like citing of environmentally unpleasant things in minority neighborhoods is something there's a bill in on. And there are bills in terms of equity issues on a whole range of issues, from education to substance abuse to the administration of all sorts of government programs, that I think the legislature is going to be taking up next year and doing more. Criminal justice is where we started because of certainly the spotlight that the killing of George Floyd presented. But there's a big agenda, and we're going to be moving it next year. And you're doing it in Mamaroneck, and Larchmont, at the local level and at the level of CURE. So thank you. I'm very appreciative of being part of this discussion and our work going forward together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. When we come around to you again, I think there's some background noise in your feed. So when we hear you speak, there sounds like a fan or an air conditioner or something's blowing. So just so you know.
I have an old Mac, and I'm getting Mac is being delivered next week. So maybe.
Okay. Got you.
I have a fan, but this one does.
Got it. Okay. Last but not least, Catherine Parker.
Hi, good to be with you. And, thank you again for another wonderful discussion with CURE. And I'm going to start back with something that you have been really working hard to sort of bring to everybody's, do a little conscious raising, which is the whole idea that as human beings, we all have implicit bias. And I raised that issue because as a board in Westchester County, my board has been looking through that lens, trying to undo all sorts of issues of inequity for quite a while. And we've worked on issues related to criminal justice for years. Before the whole George Floyd thing, we were having conversations with our Department of Public Safety. And by the way, just to sort of give everybody who's watching a little tutorial on Westchester County as far as policing goes. We're not like Mamaroneck, village or town, which has a dedicated police force. Our police are basically charged with keeping our roads safe. So they're patrolling like the Bronx River Parkway is a Westchester County road. But we also have a police academy. And the police academy is used not just for people who are becoming police officers, but for additional training. And one of the areas that we've spent a lot of time talking with our Commissioner of Public Safety is implicit bias training, because that's something that, again, many of us have been very aware that, in many areas, again, as human beings, this can crop up everywhere, does crop up everywhere. And in fact, in Westchester County, sadly, we've had some situations where people have lost lives because of quick judgments, in a very heated and stressful situation. And in fact, after the murder of Christopher Ridley, our trainers at the police academy went for additional training out in California. California had done a lot of work after Rodney King to again try to really help their police departments become more aware of the bias that they bring to the job as human beings. Again, I have to say that. And so we really modeled and changed our program after the Christopher Ridley incident. So that was about 10 years ago, so that there's much more of a focus on implicit bias training. We even do train the trainer programming now for other police departments. And then we have programs of like continuing education for officers throughout Westchester County and all the different municipalities that send their officers back to our county for sort of the continuing education. So that's been happening as ongoing, as something that I think has been very positive. But to what Governor Cuomo has done, we of course formed a task force. Several of my colleagues are on that task force, as our, it's a pretty broad spectrum of Westchester, people that represent all different aspects of Westchester County. And we've had several public hearings. And for those of you who are watching, I've been e-blasting to let people know when the next public hearing is. If you don't get my e-blasts, just drop me a line at parker@westchesterlegislators.com and we'll add you to the list. But they're doing a lot of work. And I also hope that part of what we're going to be hearing about is something that Westchester is responsible for, which is, once people are in custody, they get transferred to our county jail. And seeing the change that then would happen once they are incarcerated. And so one of the things that I have seen that I think is a very positive step forward is that we understand that a lot of people that get caught in the criminal justice system, it's this whole cycle of, it's first, it often starts right with racism and the rules that have created a situation where people have a hard time, find themselves in poverty, can't get out of poverty, the stress, and how that can play a part in mental health. And so we see that cycle, and our county jail has just set up a program with our Department of Community Mental Health as an in-house total mental health, also with co-occurring disorders, drug abuse, and things like that, to really try to get to some of the underlying issues that get somebody into the criminal justice system, and hopefully to help again give them a better outcome once they're out. The other area that I think Westchester has been at the forefront of is with our youth shelter of Westchester. It was started many years ago, I think in the late 80s, early 90s. And it is a fantastic model for young people that make a mistake. And, it really addresses sort of, again, all the pieces of how the system may have failed them, as well as helping them really understand and how they can do things differently. It's a wonderful program. I had hoped, and part of what my responsibility as a legislator is in the appropriations of funds. I had put at one point back in 2017 for the 2018 budget, a pretty significant investment to help expand that program. And because I thought that once the state had passed the raise the age, that we would be able to really push that program even more. but unfortunately there were some issues related to sort of the structure of the where their people are housed that didn't fall into the parameters of the law. But it's a great program, and I think Westchester again has been at the forefront of looking for some of these opportunities to deal with all the underlying pieces of why somebody ends up in the criminal justice system.
Thank you. There's a lot there. There's like 7 different panels in that response right there. Thank you so much, Catherine. So we're going to move to another topic. We're going to go into immigration. What we learned about from our incredible panelists last week, actually, was that, there's no line, right? We hear people say, my grandfather got online. Why can't they get online? Whatever that means. So there's no line. It takes probably a good 2 decades to really land here and be here as a citizen. And it's what we learned from Professor Merton is that it's almost impossible without legal representation. So there's, a whole host of issues that come with immigration. And so the question is, much of our immigration policy is made at the federal level. But in New York State, we've passed the green light law, which enables undocumented workers to have driver's licenses. Westchester County passed the Immigration Protection Act, which limits the extent to which local enforcement can ask people about their current status. I believe that's in that act. And so our question is, what other laws and sort of resolutions are on the table at the state and county level in empowering and protecting our immigrants? And maybe I'll try to mix it up a little bit. Nancy, again, since you might leave us, if you want to jump in.
Thanks. Well, as you said, most of those laws are really promulgated by the federal government. And I'm very happy that New York has come out and taken that stand. I certainly supported the green light laws and wrote letters to the governor telling him so. In the town of Mamaroneck, when Donald Trump first issued his front really on immigrants and immigration, I put out a statement from the town of Mamaroneck talking about how we did not agree with that, but also illuminating our operating procedure, our police operating procedure, which is in the town of Mamaroneck, no police officer is going to ask anyone their immigration status, and no police officer is going to work with anyone from the federal government regarding immigration status unless there is a warrant from a court and a judge has signed a warrant, because then they have to comply with that. And so I wanted it clear right away to our community and everyone in our community that the town of Mamaroneck would like to support everyone, and our police are here to support every single person in the community, regardless of their immigration status, and that we would not be asking for it, and we're not interested in it. And this was not anything new. This is standard operating procedure that has always gone on, and I just wanted to reinforce that. I don't know what other laws or resolutions or regulations we can do at the local level, but I'm certainly open to any, because I want to support the immigrant population in our community, and I'm in regular contact with the Community Resource Center, asking them how we can help and trying to support them. So I think that it is past the point of when we should have been addressing these issues. The legacy of all of our history of discrimination of all kinds of people, and that includes immigrants as well. So I'm very happy that in our society, it does seem like there is a real momentum to focus on people who have been discriminated against in almost every arena, not just in the legislative arena and politics, but also in cultural arena and literature and theater and music and everything. And I think it's way past time to focus on this legacy. And I would love to know what else we could do in the town of Mamaroneck, because we do want people to feel part of the community and safe in the community.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else want to chime in instead of me calling out? Yes, Mayor Murphy.
Yeah, I just want to say that the village of Mamaroneck remains a vibrant community because of immigrants. We have a large immigrant population. I think one of the main reasons our downtown still flourishes, where a lot of downtowns in old suburbs are struggling. I think that they create economic opportunity because they are striving to succeed, and they will be our entrepreneurs of the future. Their children will be sitting as mayor and as trustees in our village in the very near future. And I think that that the immigration we've seen over the past 25 years has really helped the village of Mamaroneck. I mean, obviously, if you followed the history of the village of Mamaroneck, there have been some growing pains and difficulties. But I think a lot of what we can do as elected officials, we can't change immigration policy if there's, frankly, immigration policy that's ignorant and prejudiced. We can't change that. But what we can change is how we deal with people, the message we send to our community. And the message I want to send to our community is that everyone is welcome in the village of Mamaroneck, and we value everyone's experience. And I personally think, and I think that, if you did an economic cost-benefit analysis, that the village of Mamaroneck definitely benefits from having so many immigrants who are working so hard and trying to raise their families the same way, our ancestors came here to have a better life. They're striving to have that better life. I see it in the parks. I see these families together and on a Saturday and Sunday. And I know how difficult it is because, a lot of folks who are struggling, they can't work from home. They have to go out every day and work. And so they have to juggle the kids getting homeschooled and all of that. And I'm grateful that I don't have young children anymore. I don't know how people do it with what's going on now with the COVID. But I just want to say that we in the village of Mamaroneck value, and I know the rest of the Board of Trustees feels this way, and the administration of the village of Mamaroneck feels this way, that this is a community that we want to listen to. This is a community who oftentimes has not been vocal about what they need, and who we want to listen to, and because they have every right to have their voices heard. They're residents of this community, and we are lucky to have them.
Thank you so much. Yes, Steve Otis.
Two things. After Donald Trump was elected president, and certainly huge uncertainty and nervousness in the immigrant community, I was at an amazing meeting at the Community Resource Center to talk about what the legal terrain was going to look like. And one of the sergeants or lieutenants from the Village of Mamaroneck Police Department was there and made it very clear that in Mamaroneck, there was going to be no issue where you shouldn't report a crime in fear that they're going to turn you into ICE, that immigration issues are going to be involved. A very strong message from day one out of the Mamaroneck Police Department that this was going to be the policy, to reassure people that they could still seek help from the police if they needed help from the police, because they weren't going to be mixed in with immigration laws. A similar kind of presentation was made by the police chief in Portchester about the same time at a couple of churches in Portchester. Very important. There is a piece of legislation that both Shelley, Mayor, and I were co-sponsors of this year that has passed both houses and not been delivered to the governor yet. this is the Protect Our Courts Act. Really, it's to, in state law to the extent that we can, prevent federal officers from interfering with undocumented individuals who may be in the courthouse for something else, with some sort of ICE enforcement action. So there is something still pending at the state level that we'd like to see signed, but these are important policies because people need to know that the local law enforcement can protect them. And if they're hiding in fear that they're going to be turned in, that's a whole different thing. Another thing that we're all involved with is trying to get more legal resources to groups like Community Resource Center, so that there are lawyers to be able to provide there and throughout the Hudson Valley legal services to undocumented families. Very important. It's an ongoing battle. The state has provided money, and we need to do more.
Thank you. Yeah, the legal services was certainly a takeaway from our immigration panel, that it's just essential. Shelley, would you like to speak to that?
Well, first place, I really want to commend, Tom and the village of Mamaroneck and the town of Mamaroneck too, because it is so obvious when you represent different municipalities, which towns' leaderships and police departments embrace their immigrant community and accept them and value them as the economic engine that, as Tom said, is, rebuilt that downtown of the village of Mamaroneck, in my opinion, and created people, pre-COVID who want to come there from all over. So I think you're extraordinarily fortunate, but I always have to take a step back and remind people that the world is not as easy as it sometimes sees about these issues. So on the green light bill, which we did pass, and I'm very pleased, and I was a sponsor, as Steve was, that was a very hard sell. That was I may lose my vote, I may lose my race if I vote for this bill. There are communities, and luckily it isn't ours, because there is this residue of understanding and I think an effort to deal with racism. But there are many communities that are represented by our colleagues where this vote was almost impossible to take, and there was pressure not to do the bill. Now, I knew firsthand, as you all knew, that people were driving without a license. And we were very fortunate to have police chiefs stand up and validate the safety implications of adopting a bill that said to somebody, better you got into an accident with a license than you got into an accident and ran away because you didn't have a license. But we had the validation of the police. And so I think it's always important to step back and see, when we pass these bills, and those of us who support them, like Steve and I, and particularly because we're from the suburbs, it's very important to build a residue of support for these concepts. And certainly the work of CURE and others is very helpful in giving us the underpinning to make the arguments that this has support. Don't underestimate that our diverse communities support this. So that's one point I want to make. We passed several years ago, when I was in the assembly with Steve, the DREAM Act, which was another very controversial bill at the time, that in a child that came at 3 or 4, and there's plenty in Mamaroneck, whose parents may be undocumented and the child is undocumented, they came as an infant, then went all the way through the Mamaroneck school system and is at the top of their class, was not eligible for the basic financial aid to go to SUNY or CUNY. And we want those kids to succeed. So in time, we were able to pass this simply to make them eligible for a TAP grant. Again, it was very controversial at the time. It turned out to be, in my opinion, not such a big deal, just like green light, where we have thousands of people applied and got licenses and the world didn't change. But it is important to step back a little from the bubble of safety and common thought that we have here to realize that these issues are hard, because Trump has politicized immigration to such a degree that there's tremendous anger in many of the worlds that we step into. But the one thing I want to say, certainly on the Protect Our Courts Act, and we're going to talk about excluded workers, I know later in your point, I mean, because there are people who got laid off through COVID and cannot get unemployment because they are not documented, basically because they don't have a social security number, we have a severe problem on our hands in the immigrant community. People are going to work, either they're at risk of COVID, but there's nothing they can do about it because they need income, and there is no income substitute because they're not eligible for unemployment. And for communities like Mamaroneck, Portchester, New Rochelle, where we have these vibrant immigrant communities, we've got to come to grips with that.
Yeah, and I think what we learned from our panel too, Shelley, is that, so often an immigrant will get I guess it's called an ITN number, and
Yeah.
they will pay into the system we benefit from, but they won't get those benefits. So they're waking up and going to work, their jobs aren't protected, they're not receiving Social Security, but they're paying taxes. And so this is definitely something that needs to be addressed. Catherine, again, last but not least.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the Immigrant Protection Act because that was a really heavy lift, and I think it needs a little unpacking. Prior to in the last administration, it passed just along party lines. It was vetoed by the former county executive, who said that he was really echoing what we were hearing out of the White House, which is, we're going to become a sanctuary county and it's going to end up costing us money. And, this is a horrible thing. Well, I think the public weighed in on that after 2017 and understood that for public safety, this was a very good thing. And, some of those colleagues that have voted against the Immigrant Protection Act were voted out of office. However, to the point that, again, with elected officials and what is done in the Sound Shore with, Mayor Murphy and Supervisor Seligson, it's not the same all over Westchester. And one of my colleagues who, was very much against the Immigrant Protection Act is now sitting on a town board in another community. So it has not gone away completely. And that's one of the reasons why we fought very hard to pass this on a countywide level. Because if we were just to rely on the goodness of a few leaders in pockets of Westchester, it's really not helping the whole problem. And so we saw that we could really make a huge difference by passing the Immigrant Protection Act. And after that, we passed other legislation that was really focused on again, protecting the immigrant community. One of the laws that we passed was prevention of wage theft, which absolutely was, so many immigrant employees were getting taken advantage of, not getting paid after doing a full day's work. And so we, for areas where we had control over a business licensing process, where we could withhold the licensing if they were convicted for withholding wages, then we took that step and we passed that. And then the other end of the spectrum, besides legislation that we've worked on, we, again, going to funding. When I first started, and I'm finishing up my 7th year as county legislator. So when I first started as county legislator in 2014, knowing the great work that Community Resource was doing, I was surprised going into our first budget season for 2015 that they really weren't part of the county budget at all. And, they had received a very nominal amount of money through the former administration. And so working with Community Resource Center and understanding their needs, what we have ended up funding for the last 4 years is an employment training program, which has been phenomenal. And, they provide to us as data. I mean, it's not like we just write a blank check and say, here, go have fun. I mean, they really show us the metrics for the success of the program. And the program has really grown and they've been able to place people. And so, that's definitely part of what county government is doing to help our immigrant community. But there are other areas too. I mean, when you look at our county budget, you can see, we talked a little bit about legal services. Legal services fall into a number of different areas and that benefit the immigrant community. We also, help fund childcare. That's another area. And so there are many sort of budgetary lines that we look at that I know are making a real difference throughout Westchester with the immigrant population.
Thank you so much. So I just want to keep moving on because we have, I think, 3 more topics, and I'm going to hand it over to Gabby.
Yes. Thank you
I said
so
that like I
much.
didn't know your name, Gabby.
Yeah, I know we have a lot still to get through, but I'm glad to be going next because the next topic we're going to discuss is affordable housing. And there's a lot of overlap with immigration across all of the topics, but I think particularly when it comes to access to affordable housing in our community, immigrants, play a big part in that. So before diving into the questions, just in case there are some attendees who weren't able to listen in on that panel, just to give you the key takeaways. First of all, there is a need in this area for affordable housing units, and it's not an insignificant need. And I think very interestingly, when we heard from a nonprofit developer, lack of land availability and resources are not really the key obstacles they face. Really, prejudice and negative myths about how affordable housing affects the surrounding community, these are still very much alive. And we may know that sort of old and toxic American narratives about race maybe feed these perspectives. They still persist on a local and national level, as we saw from the outgoing administration. But and just to be specific, these are sort of the old tropes about crime and violence and house price deterioration, et cetera, that we kind of know just are not true. As Mayor Murphy was alluding to earlier, immigrants and those who need access to affordable housing are very valuable members of our community. So I know we're really running out of time, and we want to have time for the other topics, but I do have I wanted to sneak, if I could, 2 questions into here. One is sort of hyper local and very practical, and I think best answered by Nancy and Tom, which is, what is the status of the comprehensive plan for the village and town of Mamaroneck, and how can we, as members of the community, get involved in that? And the comprehensive plan, for those who weren't on the housing panel, is about how we use our land going forward, and that includes whether we kind of portion some of that land for affordable housing. And the other question, if we have time for it, is sort of broader and perhaps even more philosophical, and this is kind of directed towards the whole panel, which is, what work is being done or can be done to dispel this prejudice and these negative myths about how affordable housing affects the surrounding community? So I'll maybe, Tom, if we can start with you.
I actually, I'm going to ask if I could jump in, Gabby, because I have to leave in like 2 minutes. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a town board meeting at 7. So let me just quickly say that the comprehensive plan in the town of Mamaroneck was all set to start last March. It was not a good time to start anything with public outreach. So it has been put on hold due to coronavirus. But we are getting to the point where we recognize there are so many issues boiling up that we've got to start somewhere. And I'm hoping that we will start in the beginning of next year in starting to do the background work for it, and then be reaching out to the public in earnest in spring. And we will certainly be talking about land use, which encompasses affordable housing. But I just want to point out also, in the town of Mamaroneck, we do run a very robust Section 8 program. And that is housing, literally affordable housing, for the entire community. We have over 650 vouchers that we manage for Section 8 housing from the town of Mamaroneck. And we did have Norma Drummond, who is the Commissioner of the Department of Planning of Westchester County, address the town board at one of our last board meetings about the Housing Needs Assessment Report. And that is an incredible report created by the county that talks about very,
I'll get to that, Nancy.
okay.
Since I'm here from the county.
But that shows you, when it gives you real numbers for real communities, our communities. And so the need is clearly explained there. And the myth that you talked about, I just have to say, what I hear from people all the time in terms of complaints, I wouldn't say goes to that myth. It's about density. There's a big fear of density, increasing our density and all the things that go along with that. School age kids, traffic, those are some of the things that really scare people in our community. I have to say, I have to jump off, and I'm really sorry to leave you all because this has been really great. Thank you to CURE. It's long overdue to have these discussions. I really appreciate it. So have a great rest of the time.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay. I grew up in affordable housing in New York City. We moved into an affordable housing development in 1962 when I was 1, and it allowed my mother and father to have decent, safe, clean, and very well appointed for middle of the west side of Manhattan at the time living arrangement. And so I know how important it is to any family to have that situation. In the village of Mamaroneck, we are almost done with the comprehensive plans. Everything's kind of gotten, as Nancy said, pushed back because of COVID. We were at the final stages of the comprehensive plan. But what we have done in the recent past is we passed a law last year called PLLC that had a lot to do with density in the village of Mamaroneck. But what it also did was it required any developer coming into the village of Mamaroneck to build 10% of his development as affordable. This requirement, before it was you got a bonus and there was suggestions that you do it, but now it's a concrete change. You actually have to do it. And what we've recently done is I proposed a law, and I'm grateful to the Board of Trustees for voting for it, that if you're building a development that is all affordable, that means every unit in it has an affordability requirement, you get a break on the recreation fee. And the village charges $8,500 per new unit as a recreation fee to improve recreation facilities within the village of Mamaroneck, which is something that I was on a board in 2007, and we passed the law to do that. And actually now we have over $400,000 in that fund, and we're starting to revitalize some of our parks with that money. But you get a break on that fee depending upon the level of affordability, but you definitely get a break. And so we're trying to have a carrot for developers because they have very small margins. People who are doing all affordable, like the Washingtonville Housing Alliance and West Hab, people like that, and they need every dollar to make their projects viable. And as a village of Mamaroneck, we can't offer huge tax breaks or incentive because we just don't have the wherewithal. But where we can give them a break, like with the recreation fees we have, and hopefully there will be more all affordable building in the village of Mamaroneck. I think you're right, Gabby. I think that there is an onus and a stigma to affordable housing, and it's not based in reality, and it's based in fear. And I think because it's fear because as soon as somebody proposes it, people start talking about their property values. And so what does that tell you? They think that it's going to be an undesirable development, right? And it's not. In most cases, what it's doing, and particularly, I mean, I can talk through the experience in Chelsea where I grew up. They tore down old tenements And they built, these lovely buildings. And, if you had inhabited one of those tenements, you were, online to get into the lovely building. So it really, it helped to keep the community together in a lot of ways. And it also offered, better housing. And those buildings, God, almost 60 years later, are still, there's a huge waiting list to get in. As the Washingtonville Housing Alliance has a waiting list for people, looking to access their well-run buildings. I was involved as a board member in the Washingtonville Housing Alliance when they were trying to build a couple of projects. And it was reflexive negativity about building them. And at the end of the day, you look at the neighborhood where they were put, and they have done nothing but improve the neighborhood. And, and it's just, like I was talking about before, it's just decent, hardworking people who are trying to raise their family and who are trying to make a better life, whether they're immigrants or have been here for 100 years, or they're firemen or policemen or administrative assistants. As all of us know, it takes a lot of money to live in Westchester County. There's the cost of housing, the cost of food, and then all of us who have children know children are a losing money proposition no matter what you do, right? I mean, it seemed like when my kids were growing up, every week you were buying a birthday present for somebody, or there was always that the little drain of cash that was constantly coming out the bottom. So this is a hard community to live in, and if we really do value our diversity, and that's not just going to be lip service, we have to do what we can to facilitate that. But there used to be a lot of money from the federal government for this, and that money is dried up. And before Catherine Parker and George Latimer and folks like her and him were in charge in the county, we had a county executive who fought affordable housing every step of the way. And because he fought affordable housing every step of the way, it hurt the village of Mamaroneck, because we couldn't get community development block grants. We went 8 years without community development block grants because of his intransigence. And it cost us millions and millions of dollars here in the village of Mamaroneck. So if you sense a little resentment in my voice, it's because it's real. It hurt the people in the community that I represent. So when people take stands that are just doctrinaire and are based upon their dogma without, looking at how they affect those people that they represent, I hope the voters look at that in the future. But to finish it up, I'm a big proponent of affordable housing. I think that we need more of it. Mamaroneck has a lot, and people will say, "Oh, we have what is, if you look at the chart, it says, we're pretty much where we're supposed to be." But to me, affordable housing, it's like, love and money. You can't have enough of it. The more you have, the better off you're going to be.
Can I also, I'm sorry, Tom, I wanted to jump in before Gabby jumps back in. I just want to say that when we're talking about affordable housing, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about $60,000 to $80,000 a year in income, which are, is that
Yes.
not the?
No, that's pretty much right. Yeah.
Well, it's a percentage. I think what you meant to say was 80% of average median income for the area.
Right.
And
Exactly.
or it could be either 80, 60, 40%, but it begins at about 80% of the AMI, average median income for the area.
And it also gets adjusted by the size of your family.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So, but I think interestingly, like when we think of affordable housing, I'm thinking more like, where do the folks go who are working 2 jobs and making $30,000 a year? And we're talking about just, probably a teacher who's making 75, or, so it's like a really.
That's the thing about the thing. And we considered that when we gave the break to the all affordable, because people who are building all affordable developments can go down lower. They can go down into the 40% range. They can go down into the 50% range. And they do, and they have a wider array of affordability than the person who's just building 10-unit development and is going to put one affordable apartment in. So that's why we focused on the all affordable, because historically they have a wider range of affordability.
Right, right. Thank you for clarifying.
So I was just going to jump in to say, I know we only have 20 minutes left and we have very important topics still to cover. So maybe we can just table my second question and move
I'd like
on.
to add to the conversation though on affordable housing, because I think in our area in particular, it's actually far more important than policing. You know, I really think that it's where we get a huge racial divide over housing and education. And so I think it deserves a little bit more discussion. And Tom, thank you for bringing up sort of the dark days in Westchester County under the prior administration, when this was, you know, considered federal overreach to come in and say that there's discrimination going on in housing in Westchester. It was pretty much about as plain as the nose on your face. And we had a county executive who denied, and said, that's not the case. And frankly, for 8 years, basically ended up saying affordable housing was about the worst thing that can happen to your communities. So wrong on so many levels, because, you know, frankly, and this is where I think we're still getting out from underneath sort of the you know, it's a re-education of people in Westchester as to what is affordable housing. And actually somebody had asked in the chat, and it's a great question to also talk about, what is the difference between affordable housing and who defines affordable? Is it affordable to everybody? And you know, it isn't. Actually, affordable housing, you have to have a fairly decent income. If we're talking about 80% of the average median income for this area, that's a lot of income for many, many people. And to your point about the person that's making $30,000, maybe bussing tables or, you know, really trying to scrape together a living, they're not going to be eligible for affordable housing. So it's a two-pronged issue that Westchester has a tremendous need for housing that is affordable. 12,000 units of affordable housing, but that also goes across the spectrum of what is deemed affordable housing and low income housing, and just a tremendous need. Now, Westchester, since we've had a change in administration, we are really focused on adding much more. First, what we did was we funded a study to really understand the numbers. And that the 12,000 units that I spoke of, you know, we only got that number right before COVID, that was really the real need in Westchester County. But for the last couple of years, we've been putting in about $25 million to help with, you know, both the, you know, being able to get property, to work with the developers and develop those affordable housing units. And we also, somebody asked the question too about how does this really create and make it an equitable system? Well, affordable housing, you have both rentals and you have opportunities for ownership, subsidized, you know, housing that they can buy that's going to be subsidized. So there's equity there, and it's a great program that again allows for people to really maybe have the first opportunity at building wealth. You know, we know so much, you know, looking at the past history of redlining going back, you know, quite a ways, but this is an opportunity to sort of help catch up and undo a lot of that. So I just want to put that on the record, because I really feel housing is absolutely a critical component in Westchester for changing up systemic racism. And we've really got to put that as sort of the top with education.
If I could add just briefly to that, and you're gonna have to step back and understand what the housing market is in Westchester County, not just in America. It's so expensive to live here. Our teachers, our public employees, municipal employees can barely afford to live here, and so as you go down to people who have other jobs that make less, it's even harder. COVID has made it worse because people are fleeing the city. So what is happening right now? The cost of housing in the suburbs is going up even farther. It was too high already. So this is a long-term problem, and I think Tom Murphy made the really great point. We gave away 8 years of federal money for affordable housing because of the prior administration at the county level, and that was a disgrace. We needed that money to be able to build units in all of our communities.
Abby, I'm sorry, I know you wanted to move on, but just two quick things. One is, one of the true benefits of having a new president is that we will have finally a reinvestment from the federal level in new housing development, both rentals, and I know someone asked, and I'm a big believer in co-ops as the entry place for gaining equity. I think if Westchester is only going to be a place of poor people and rich people, and people are not going to be able to buy a 2-bedroom apartment for $150,000, who are working and raising their kids and then be able to sell it and get enough for a deposit on a house, that is now the path forward in the suburbs, and we've made it literally impossible. The AMI number, in my opinion, is totally out of sync with the working people we're talking about, who are not making 60 and 80, they are making 40 to 50. And until we have more rental that is truly available and protection against eviction, which I know we're going to talk about, those folks are having nothing but trouble. This is the #1 issue in my district, particularly in the Sound Shore. Low-wage workers cannot find affordable rental apartments, and people who want to find a house cannot afford it. And there is a shortage of co-ops and other entryways into building equity. So I think we've got a lot of work to do. It's one of the great things about having President-elect Biden is we're finally going to have a reinvestment in housing.
That sounds hopeful.
I'm hopeful.
Gabby, are you finished with your section?
Yes.
This is so, like, we're getting these amazing.
I know, as you said, Nicole, we could go on.
I know, and we're also just
on
getting
each
such
topic. But.
Yeah, and we're getting great questions, which I don't want to ignore. But I see that you're all reading them, and I really appreciate that, and you're answering them as we go. So, Anne, do you want to jump in? I think we probably might just have time for your last. I don't know which one you want to choose, but it's up to you.
I know it's a big problem. I have 2 topics. One is employment and the other is education. I'm going to skip actually to remote learning and education because we have Senator Mayer here, which is a pretty great opportunity. So we're all worried about, in this particular panel, we focused a lot on remote learning, which is a very specific aspect of what's going on in education now. I mean, I could ask you a lot of questions. So we're all worried about the potential for learning loss during the pandemic, especially for marginalized students. Our low-income families who are predominantly Black and Latinx have struggled to access devices and broadband. We know that cell phones and cellular data are not adequate for doing remote school. And we also learned through our panel that costs for both broadband and wireless are multiple times more expensive in the United States than most developed countries, and specifically low-end wireless plans, which many of our essential workers, our healthcare, home workers depend on, are particularly subject to price gouging. So this kind of thing actually doesn't just affect our children and our students, but affects all members of our their families, because they need devices and broadband to be able to fill out forms, access employment, communicate, etc. So I guess I wanted to jump in and say and ask the group what we can possibly do to lower costs and increase access. And I think maybe start with Senator Mayer.
Well, thank you. This is something I'm totally passionate about. This is a statewide catastrophe. We do not have access across the board in the suburbs, the cities, the rural areas. You could be living in a homeless shelter in the Bronx. You could be living in a mobile home in a rural community, and you can be living in Mamaroneck, and all the same, you don't have access, particularly to broadband. The state has a constitutional requirement under the state constitution to provide a free basic education. And my view is, in the current climate, a free basic education is a remote education. And if we do not provide broadband, quality broadband and internet, we are basically taking away the pencil and the paper and the blackboard of the old days. So I am introducing a bill. This is a difficult area to legislate because these companies are mostly regulated by the federal government, which has preemption over the state inserting itself. I'm introducing a bill in the next week that will require these companies to pay a targeted fee into a account that is going to guarantee that every child, every school building, and every place where children live will have, for the duration of COVID, access to free quality internet or the internet substitute in places where there's not wiring. And for those who are paying, they will get a credit on their bill during the duration of this time. So this is everyone who has a kid, basically, because of the constitutional obligation, will be eligible for this. Now, it doesn't deal with the device problem. It was very hard to craft something that could get us to this place. I don't know whether this bill, whether these companies who I've met with will, I'm sure they'll lobby against it and all that. I don't really care. I think they should have voluntarily stepped up during this pandemic when everyone else is sacrificing, and not made these one-off deals with school districts. Oh, I'll send to you for $10 a kid that needs it. They should have said, we will forego making a profit during this time of national sacrifice, and we will provide quality for every kid. They haven't done it. A few of them have done little arrangements and here and there. So we're rolling out this bill, and the hope is that we are jump-starting the conversation to force them into a different place. So that doesn't answer the device issue, which I've been on the phone with the people nationally to look at what other states are doing. Again, we've been hurt by Trump because he imposed penalties on the ordering of these devices from China, which slowed the arrival of them for many districts that already paid for them. But again, we ought to get, during this time when remote learning is absolutely the baseline, every kid should have these devices, and that should be the end of the conversation. So I'm very invested in this subject. We can do better, and we're going to try to really force our state to move ahead.
So thank you. That's very heartening. I hope that passes. It sounds like an important step. Assemblyman Otis, do you have anything from the state perspective that you'd like to add?
The telecommunications company have the ability to do this now, because all they have to do, most of them have a wireless network that they charge people for, and they can turn it on now for, if you have a kid in school and you don't have the proper wireless connection, they can be making arrangements with school districts now to make this happen. And so I think Shelley's approach is to force them to do it a different way. They need to do it. It is a real crisis. One thing that is on the positive note, most of the school districts in the Assembly District I represent have done a pretty good job of getting kids hardware that don't have it. And they have dedicated funds and made laptops and other devices available. And that's been very positive. They sort of did that on their own. They sort of took account how many they need, what kids need it, but it doesn't solve the problem that Shelley's talking about. If you have the device and you have no internet where you are, it's a problem. And more broadly, telecommunications companies, we have internet around here, but if you go to more rural areas upstate, they don't want to invest in internet in areas where they don't have a lot of customers. And so there are some dead zones, not because there's a gap in technology, they're dead zones because they don't want to spend the money to build the infrastructure even though there are people out there. So this is a problem that has many elements. I speak to school superintendents all the time about the experience they're having dealing with these matters. I'd say one thing of the Mamaroneck School District. The board and the superintendent have made a big commitment to trying to stay open, and while they have the hybrid thing going on, there's a real commitment to keep the hybrid going rather than sending everyone home. And so not every district is either able or prioritizes that way. I think that's the policy perspective they're coming from, and I think that's appreciated by parents.
So I see that we only have about 4 minutes left. Nicole, I think I'd like to offer Mayor Murphy and Legislator Parker the opportunity to answer that question too, and then maybe we can, then I'll turn it back to you.
Okay.
Okay, we at a recent Board of Trustees meeting, we had Meg Kalfer, who's actually watching tonight, from the STEM Alliance, come and talk about this connectivity divide in the community. And it was a very informative discussion, and we put her presentation on our website. And part of the problem is that when school's over, the kids have to give the device back. So not only is it, as my colleagues in the state government pointed out, it's a matter of A, having a device, and B, having connectivity. But and so we have to work, and maybe this is something that can be done through the 501c3 to get these kids devices that they can have all year round. Because with every child, there's a drop off in the summer, right? There's a little regression. But if you can't, have the ability to access the internet, that's a huge handicap for a lot of kids. I mean, for every kid, I think the internet is the biggest change in my lifetime. So I think that as a community, we have to work towards supporting the STEM Alliance in any way we can to get these kids to have more hardware in their hands. And I want to leave some time for Catherine.
Thanks. I'll be very brief. One way, and really the only way that Westchester at the moment really has, because as far as education goes, where the schools are sort of under the Department of Education at the state level, what are, sort of where we can help with that and where we have helped is funding some of our community-based organizations that are doing programs with children that are educational enrichment, childcare, and sort of the after-school programs. And we've helped fund a variety of those programs, and frankly we've identified the digital divide as an area that we're interested in seeing, doing more to help close that divide. And so we're looking at some new funding opportunities. I've got a couple on my radar, and one that's based right here in the district that's actually been expanding out to other areas where there's great need in parts of the county where there's even a greater need than right here.
Thank you. Back to Nicole.
Hi, I'm back. So thank you so much. I feel overwhelmed, like I do after every panel, because I have a million more questions, and we had some incredible questions in the chat. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I would love for you to come back. So maybe sometime in the spring we could reunite. I just want to leave with one thing. There was a text of someone I know who said, I want to be anonymous, but I want to be identified as a person of color. And I'll just leave you, with this question, because again, we're the Coalition for Understanding Racism Through Education. But this person texted two things. One is, would you be willing in your work and with your communities to take implicit bias or undoing racism trainings. And also, as we are seeming to vote for more people of color in different political positions, is there a listening and an exchange of following voices of color and leaders of color in these equity conversations, right? Because we're a panel of white people here, and so this person wanted to know if these things are, on your minds, being discussed in the political landscape, and something that you're interested in doing and looking forward to doing.
May I start on this one? Because I think
Absolutely.
it's a fantastic question.
Yeah,
and,
everyone gets a minute.
Yeah, so I'll be brief then. I did implicit bias training a couple of years ago through the Westchester Women's Agenda. And, I encourage everybody, to, as I say, as human beings, we all have implicit bias. So important to be able to sort of, catch yourself, think about something, reflect on it, in a situation where that may crop up. So I think it's an excellent point, and as I say, very important.
Yeah, and I could say I have taken implicit bias training. I have brought in an implicit bias training seminar to the Village of Mamaroneck for its employees and for its boards and commissions. If you look on the Village of Mamaroneck agenda for the coming meeting, there is going to be another discussion of bringing in more training for that. There have been times when I have recognized that in myself, implicit bias, and it's something. It's who I don't want to be, but it is something that was kind of baked into who I was, and I think we all have to try and look at where we came from to see where we want to go, and I don't want to look at the world through the eyes that of the situation that I was born into. I've now become a middle-aged white man, and I realize that I have privilege because of that. That I, in some respect, I didn't earn. I mean, I earned a lot in my life, but a lot of the privilege that I have, I didn't earn. And there's a lot of people who, in some respects, have worked harder than me that don't get the same recognition because of the situation in life that they were born into. So I'm cognizant of that, and I want to be aware of that as I go through my own personal experiences in life, but also as a leader in the community to try and impart that we all have a different perspective, and we have to try and the very hard thing in life to look at things through another person's point of view. But if we're going to get past this, that's really the key.
So I'm happy, Nicole, to jump in. Absolutely would look forward to having it. And I hope that we as a legislative body in my conference, majority minority, I think would be very productive. And in my conversations on education, I can assure you that spending a great deal of time in the cities, particularly of New York, not only New York City, but all the cities in dealing with their education problems, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and then the smaller cities, which I was on yesterday, which are predominantly minority. We really have to make sure these voices, particularly of minority parents, are heard. It's one of my little beefs. Much as I love the PTA, it is traditionally sort of isolated itself from communities of parents of color. In COVID, there's a great opportunity for those voices to be heard, because these issues in education are so emotional and important and critical to the future of children and families. So I am very much working on encouraging a number of groups that are largely parents of color to have a much louder voice in advocacy at the state level, particularly where we need to hear, we absolutely need to hear. So I appreciate the question, and I so appreciate the opportunity to be here. And it's really quite an honor to represent a community that has Mamaroneck and CURE coming out of it. And so thank you for that, because that's a great blessing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Steve, do you want to end our session for us this evening?
To the question, thank you for the question. Interestingly, the state assembly actually already has brought into our workplace training for members and for staff diversity training, and so this has been a few years, but that we've had that, and it's very good. More broadly, I'll say in the assembly, we have a very diverse conference, and for the last few years, I've been chair of the Assembly Democratic Conference meetings. And I will tell you that every key policy issue gets discussed very broadly, especially related to racial equity and economic justice lines. In-depth, sometimes hours of discussion among our colleagues, and Shelley knows what I'm talking about because she was in the assembly, she went to Senate. And so those values and those concerns are robustly part of the policy making that goes on, I know, in both houses of the legislature right now. And it's a very valuable thing. It's a very positive thing. It actually drove a lot of the criminal justice reforms that we had in the last few years. And it's because it wasn't like, here's a bill, let's pass it. Here's an idea, let's work on it. Let's hear from people who actually are out in the field, sometimes practicing law, other things, to make sure that we're doing it right. And that is only by having an inclusive process in terms of governmental decision making, needed at all levels. I know it happens locally as well, but we need to do more. And Cure is doing a great job. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Meg, wherever you are, who's not on the screen tonight, but I'm a fan of Meg and all of her work. And
We all are.
Been a great discussion. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you so much for being here, everyone. We truly, truly appreciate it. Be well, stay well, so you can keep up the good work. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.